Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Ryan here, joined by Matt. Matt, how are you today?
I'm okay, thank you.
I knew it. I knew it. He was going to go for something different. Fantastic. Fantastic. Today we're going to do this short video, well, short for Matt and myself, on self-sabotage. It's a question that we get a lot, and a lot of people that come into this type of work. Self-sabotage is a very, very hot topic because we see it left, right, and center, whether it's someone's health, their happiness, their relationships, their career, money, all of these things in life. We can have wills, wishes, and desires around what we want out of them. But sometimes along the way, we trip ourselves up. And then that comes in the form of self sabotage. Just before we pressed record here, Matt and I were talking, and he used the term of self preservation. And I think that's a really, really good distinction of what self sabotage is. So, what do you mean when you say self preservation, Matt? What are we actually preserving?
Self-sabotage is like, people are like, stop sabotaging yourself. But it's kind of like one of those things. It's not something we're consciously doing. It's not something people mean to do or can even help. It's something that happens to us. And we could call it, what would be more true is like unconscious self-preservation, maybe, and it comes back to the survival physiology, the instinctual brain, the part of us that works and is oriented around keeping us alive, keeping us safe from threat. And so it's kind of like, this kid, he was in recovery from addiction, and then he got a job, and then he sabotaged himself. He sabotaged it all. That's not entirely true. It might look that way from the surface, like as a surface phenomena. But if you look a bit deeper as to what's actually going on, is sabotage happened to him. His threat response overrode, his frontal cortex, his make conscious choice. And, so what happens is, and this is all like it can be all linked back to our developmental trauma, our developmental years, and the way our identity is structured, and what we felt as being safe in our early environment versus what we felt as being threatening. It's kind of like in one of those situations, being seen can be felt as threatening for a lot of people, because being seen can open us up to vulnerability. And when we feel vulnerable really means like, we're vulnerable to being hurt. That's how we can perceive it. If we're vulnerable, we're open to being wounded, shamed, attacked, whatever, whether physically or emotionally, etc. So it's like if someone starts to take steps and makes progress towards whatever got, whatever dream they've got, whatever, their life starts to change and they start to look good, or whatever it is, they're creating something, and then something steps in, and it's like maybe they get that little too close to being seen. It's like, say someone, completes a training in counseling or somatic therapy or whatever, and then it's like, oh yeah, they've got all this idea, like I want to be a somatic therapist, but then as it's like they have to start creating content or be seen, it's like something steps in and grips, and we could say that sabotages, braces against it, that sabotages their process, and so that happens on a really unconscious level. It happens to preserve the self, it happens to preserve the body, to keep us safe from threat and from overwhelming fears, etc. And so that happens on the lower quadrants of the brain. It doesn't happen as a conscious decision. It's kind of like, it's like the survival instinct will always trump the conscious will. Anything we try to do to push through is always overridden by the survival instinct. And that's important. It's like why these instinctual energies, like in a moment of, like we go into fight or flight, it's like, so we don't have to think about it. It's like if a tiger's running at you, going to bite your face off, eat you, whatever. It's like you're going to go into fight or flight. You're going to go run purely on instincts. And any attempt to consciously will that away is going to be thwarted. It's going to be interrupted, by either the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. It's like you can't will yourself out of anxiety, so to speak. Anxiety is like a constant hum of the survival
So if I just tell
sympathetic.
myself to calm down, it won't work?
Yeah, exactly. It's like a lit match has been thrown on petrol and the house is burning down around you, and you're like, just breathe. It's like, well, no, you're gonna get up and run, whether you kind of want to or not. It's like the instincts are powerful on this level, and so unconscious self preservation, self sabotage happens on these same levels. And so unless we actually learn to connect with the body and work with the energies that come up, kind of metabolize that sympathetic response, that comes up. Say someone, it's like, oh yeah, I've completed my training, I'm now a practitioner, a counselor, and you can apply this to anything. This is just one example. Or I've been training for the marathon for 3 years, and then when it comes to actually running in the race, you freeze. You can't do it. Or you really underperform because the anxiety is just so strong. And so then as soon as someone comes to do it, that brace, it's like that has its roots through the past, through different experiences where we learned that being seen and being vulnerable wasn't safe. And so when, say when we're a child, we have a moment of vulnerability and everyone laughs at us. We use this example a lot. I put my hand up in class and ask a question and everyone laughs at me. And I get that knot in the gut, that kind of sinking feeling that says, oh, what's wrong with you? Ask that question. It's kind of shame response, shut down, or I want to run out of the class. I can't run. I can't fight the whole class, so I freeze instead, like a deer in the headlights. So we move through those survival responses. But then that, say reenacted, that's a moment of vulnerability where we were threatened and felt taken advantage of. Our boundaries were crossed. We felt out of our window of tolerance. And then that creates an imprint in the nervous system, in the body, So then it's like we associate being seen with threat. They kind of get coupled together, vulnerability and threat. So then later in life, I go to do a talk at a public place, or I, jump on a live Facebook Live, or I do whatever, something will end sharp. And it's like, no, it's not safe. Don't do it.
I've got to cancel it. Or
Yeah,
I go to press post on something, go, no, people don't want to hear this, so I'll just delete it and get rid of it.
Exactly. Or procrastinate, as a kind of freeze. There's no energy moving. Like it just, we freeze against it. And so from the embodied processing perspective, like we look at the beliefs, we look at where it came from, and we really work body, because that's where it's held. It's kind of like when, I put my hand up and everyone laughs, that example, it's like we feel that in our gut, or in our heart. Our heart kind of closes over, our gut clenches up, our legs might become stiff, we might get the shakes. It's a physiological response. It's not just a psychological phenomena. It's felt through the body, these instincts. And so with AP, we work with those sensations. We work with someone to help them metabolize and move through the felt sense of that experience and return to safe and calm. And like if something's been reenacted over and over again, if someone's had repeated experiences of when they're vulnerable, taken advantage of, it can take a lot of time to kind of unwind that. I look at healing as more the capacity to hold what comes up for it, and it doesn't rule our life anymore. It doesn't mean someone won't experience some anxiety when they're about to jump on a Facebook Live, or, about to create content or run in the marathon or all that. But the anxiety isn't overriding just decision making. So then the self-sabotage, the unconscious self-preservation has started to become conscious. So they can actually be with it. They can stay within their window of tolerance. They have the skill and the capacity to be with whatever comes up and make what decision they want to make that's more aligned with their authentic goal.
Yeah, and it's so important what you said about being able to hold it, because then we can see that, oh, there's that part again, and I'm experiencing that anxiety that I've been working with both in and out of session. And I'm like, I see you, I hear you, I can do some techniques and whatnot, but it's not going to stop me doing what it is that I truly want to do. Whether that's putting content out there, getting on a Facebook Live, starting to see clients, starting to advertise yourself, whatever it is. And there's so many other ways it can show up. It can show up in Relationship, if we have early attachment wounding, then we can get into a relationship and, yeah, this is what I want. This relationship's fantastic. But then there'll be a level where it gets to a certain degree of, I guess, seriousness in the relationship when that old wound will start to surface. And so in those moments of self-sabotage, we have two parts of the psychic and somatic structure that are active, that are pulling in different directions. Because in EP we talk all about parts. We have many different parts happening in this mind and this body, and so this one part of me that wants to connect and have this relationship and have this fairy tale life or whatnot, that part's going down the road to a degree. Then all of a sudden the old traumatic imprint becomes active and says, no, it's not safe to keep going down this road. And we can wrestle with it for a little bit, but that self-preservation, that survival part, will at the end of the day, it'll just win that battle because it's too strong. It's really at our core, a core survival threat. What are some other examples? Like money?
I've got one. It's a personal experience when I was in addiction. I'd get clean, get into recovery, like by going to a rehab or whatever. And then when I'd get out, I'd tell myself, like, you just do not use, that's the only thing you need to do. At a certain point, give it days, it would never ever be months, it would be like a day or a week or a week and a half. And I'd be convincing with my conscious mind, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Like, while the whole rest of my body is like, please do it, like it's the only thing that's going to make you feel okay. And then I'd be walking all the way to the dealer's house, my head saying, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. No, you're not going to do it. You're not going to do it. You're not going to do it. Boom, I'd use, and so it's just that opposition, that inner conflict, dissonance that happens from our survival physiology, our body, and what it feels safe to do and what I want, like I want more than anything to stop using. And then everyone's like, what are you doing? Like, you've done it again. You're just going to end up back in rehab, blah, blah, blah. And I'd be like, oh my God, I couldn't help it. So that idea that I could override that with my conscious will, like I proved it to myself an infinite amount of times that I couldn't, so it was just this kind of inner conflict, two opposing parts. And the somatic, what the body felt safe to do, and the body's need for regulation, or the need to kind of mitigate and calm some of the huge sympathetic energies I was feeling, the overwhelm, and what my conscious mind wanted to do, it would always win, always, every time. And that's just one example. It's like people do it all the time, like play out different patterns. That's an extreme example, but there's very small things people do. It's like, I'm going to go to the shops. I'm not going to buy, I'm not going to buy a bit of clothing.
I'm not going to go through the drive-through on the way home. I'm not going to go through the drive-through.
Exactly. I'm not going to eat chocolate tonight. I'm not going to have sweets tonight after tea. And then it's like, and it's like the conscious will can sometimes hold it at bay for a certain amount of time. But then when something goes wrong, it's like when it rains and it pours, which way is the current going to go? Which way is something goes wrong, we get a minor trigger, whatnot, and our survival physiology gets activated. And then we're at the cupboard, like munching down like all the Kit Kats and chocolate, So it's the same kind of thing. And it's like, oh, I told myself I wouldn't do that.
Yeah. There's so many examples. You brought up a good point as well around how we then beat ourselves up afterwards and we feel like a failure. We're like, oh, you're such an F up, you're a piece of shit. Why do you always do that? And so we create a lot of self-worth issues that we take this issue that's already there and then we pile so much more pain and suffering on top of it by beating ourselves up, because we don't understand that we didn't really have a chance, because we didn't have the tools, the knowledge, the capacity, the understanding to know even what was happening in the moment, let alone that it was too hard to win that battle of consciously, turning around the Titanic to an extent. Some other examples like, money is a big one. We'll feel safe to sort of have a certain amount of money and then it becomes unsafe. That's maybe because when we were young, we were told that, having lots of money wasn't a good thing, or people like that were evil. We feel like if you have lots of money, people will take it. Health-wise, I've seen a lot of the time when someone, the family really connected through food and everything. And as soon as someone starts to make different food choices or get in a healthier state, it goes against their connection piece with the family. They'll feel like they'll be ostracized, knowingly or not, and they'll go back to those old patterns. So it can show up in a myriad of forms. And what we would always do to approach this stuff with embodied processing is that we would explore the part that feels like it needs to self-preserve, that self-preservation part. We need to start to understand and explore that, because once we do that, that's when, as Matt was saying earlier, we can start to understand and start to process and know the underlying, I guess, origins of where that self-preservation part was born. And then also we can develop the capacity to start to hold that throughout our day-to-day life. So what I'll do now, I'll just quickly bring up our EP flowchart here of a session, and we'll just give a really basic rundown of what that would look like. Matt and I did a video a couple of days ago. It's called Becoming Embodied, where we broke down the flowchart pretty much in depth. So if you want to go watch that, then just go to thecenterforhealing.com/blog. And you'll find it on there. And so with everything with EP, we take a very exploratory and curious outlook to all these different parts of a person as we're working through it. So let's say that it is the part of being seen. That was the first example that you gave, Matt. Because we get it a lot, people come in to train with us, and it's in the first module of EP. We bring up the always needing to do the next course before I'm ready or good enough to be able to actually help people, and a lot of people tend to feel seen with that. And so what we do here, we take people through the options 1, 2, and 3. You see at the top is resourcing. We've got many other videos on resourcing if you want to jump into that. But we're helping someone start to feel no activation, a safe or neutral feeling within the body. And we use that as an anchor or a foundation to come back to, just in case in the session the person starts to get into an overwhelmed emotional state. We can come back there. So we can actually invite in these parts. Once we understand that there's a part that is afraid to be seen or afraid to be vulnerable or really scared of criticism. And these are the things that might come up when we put ourselves out there. Let's say to start working with people, sharing our story, or just start to advertise our services. Then we can start to invite that part in. We can locate that part, in the body. What does that part feel like? We can use some imagery and just imagine putting ourselves out there and, sharing our story in front of people and just notice what's happening in the body, where the fear sits, what the fear is about. We get to know the qualities of that part, is what we call it. And then we can do some really skillful questions that we ask in EP to start to try and find the roots of where this part may have been born out of. And we use the analogy of trying to tracing a thread back. It's like this thing's happening in our life today that I'm scared to put myself out there and I keep sabotaging or procrastinating on what I know I need to do. That's what's happening now. Where does the thread lead back into my past? Where are the origins of that? And we start to trace that back. And maybe that was the feeling of, being judged or criticized when we were younger, maybe in the family context, school context, or both, because normally there were periods in our life where that did happen. That's why the fear was born. Yeah. But what we've done is we've held that as a belief and we've stored it as baggage. And that now, what was, I guess, adaptive at the time in the short term has become very maladaptive in the long term, because it's stopping us doing what we want to do in this life. And so we might trace it back. And like Matt said, it might be something as innocuous as, putting the hand up in class, everybody laughing and having no stable resource to help bring our nervous system back into a regulated state. Then we start to work with those images, thoughts, associations, all the things that happened back then. And most importantly, we jump into the body and deal with oftentimes the embarrassment, the fear, the shame, all of that kind of stuff that arose. And we start to work with that within the body. We work with maybe that freeze response. Matt said that's a very common one in a situation like that. And we have different techniques for doing that. And what we're doing is we're helping this energy start to move through the body. And it's very extraordinarily rare that it's all going to move through all at once in one session. But what we're doing by working on this, we're slowly unwinding that stress that happened at the time. And over time, like Matt said, when these things in life happen where someone says, hey, I heard that you're doing this somatic therapy type of work. I have this podcast and I talk about this stuff. Why don't you come on as a guest? You go, oh, there's that anxiety again, that part that doesn't want to be vulnerable and is scared, but I see it and I can hold that energy. Yes, I'm going to go and do that podcast and share my story and put myself out there. And so we can do that with anything. We can start to explore, the sabotage with money, with relationships, with our own health, all of that kind of stuff. But that's kind of the flow that it takes. Anything to add to that?
Just to emphasize what you said. So Noel Harburger, one of the other EP trainers, he's a psychologist, 20 years experience working with trauma and somatics. And, he always says, he doesn't like the term healing trauma. He likes the term holding trauma, because it's like we develop our capacity to be with what's arising for us without it sabotaging us, taking us into overwhelm, and then us living from those instinctual energies, not even making decisions from those instinctual energies, just being kind of overridden by our instincts. So when we can actually have the capacity to be someone, something consciously, and remain present to it, and maybe even be curious about it and experience it, then it's like, well, these things don't rule our lives anymore. And it's kind of like unplugging a fan. The fan can keep spinning for a while, but when we have that capacity to be with it, they do slowly start to unravel and unwind. And especially like, the fan eventually stop. But it's kind of like you get to a point, it's like, oh, I'm actually okay to feel this anxiety now. This can be here. It's welcome. It's like I don't need to fight it, struggle with it, and get rid of it. And everyone who's experienced anxiety knows that the anxiety is made 1,000 times worse by another layer of anxiety on top of the anxiety about the anxiety that struggles with the anxiety and makes you more anxious. It's kind of like that anxiety kind of perpetuates itself. And so, to have no anxiety about feeling anxiety, it's like, what freedom. There's always going to be times in our lives when we feel a bit anxious, or we feel fearful, or something's coming up for us. It's like there's no such place as the end of the road where it's like we're a perfectly healed human and we don't experience any of the human emotions or difficulties anymore. But to learn to be our experience can end the struggle with our experience, when we develop that capacity. It's like, yeah, I've got this sensation in the body. How can I be with it and support myself? And it's interesting because if we do that, the more we allow things, the more we learn to surrender and allow our experience, the more they kind of complete and soften. It's actually our, I don't want this, that locks it in place.
Yeah, and one thing that happens is that, and this is from, trust me, personal experience, but also working with a lot of people with self-sabotage. If we sabotage in one area, we tend to sabotage in a few others as well. And so then we also create this sort of identity around, I'm just someone who always stuffs things up when they're going well. And what happens when we're able to hold, I love that term, holding trauma, when we're able to hold that and then step through and still do what our conscious wills and desires are, we give that part, that identity, contrary evidence to what it's had up until that point. So it's like that first time that we want to procrastinate and put something off, but we don't, and we do it anyway. It's like, oh, okay, that goes against my identity as a sabotager because I just didn't do it. And then every time we do that, it actually helps erode that identity of somebody who always sabotages things when they're going well or not going well. And so it has a bit of a twofold effect there, because then we can start to leave that identity behind, because that's not ideal as well.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, we'll wrap it up there. We'll keep it pretty short today. That is self-sabotage. We took you through the EP flowchart here. Like I said, we've got many other classes and everything on the website, thecenterforhealing.com/blog. Matt, pleasure as always.
Thanks, mate. See ya.
All right, see you, everyone.